Welcome to the Driving Change podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Welcome back to the Driving Change podcast. I'm excited about, I know I say that a lot, I'm excited about every episode, but I'm really excited about this year-end episode of the Driving Change podcast because I have a special guest in studio to talk to you as you listen to what Dr. Dan Docherty has to say about a year-end review. Now, for those of you who've been around the Braintrust family, you know Dr. Dan is our Chief Coaching Officer at Braintrust. He and I created NeuroCoaching, the program with the soon-to-be book to be launched as well, coming out in first quarter. And I think we were thinking about what's a way to help you, the audience who have been loyal listeners, not only learn a little bit more about what we do here at Braintrust, but learn some of the principles that we've been using to coach and teach our clients over the past year, the lessons we've learned, some of the principles that aren't just going to be effective for you as a leader or a manager or a coach in your profession, but these same principles still apply when you're trying to coach at home. And so as you guys know that listen to me for any length period of time, everything that we teach, everything that I really try to teach and bring guests on to help you all with these guests that have insightful stories, it really kind of goes back down to, can these help you both professionally and personally? And we're going to dive into that a lot deeper today with Dr. Dan Docherty, who's our President, Chief Coaching Officer. And really, he's been a driving force ever since he got his PhD. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and his expertise in what's now turned into an amazing program for businesses called NeuroCoaching. But the impact we're having on it from an emotional intelligence standpoint, from leading with your strengths, from creating a psychologically safe environment, all the different lessons that we've learned rolling this out to now literally thousands of people and thousands of coaching instances that we've been able to do. We're going to unpack some of that today. We're going to talk through a little bit of it today. And I want you, as you listen to the conversation, think about how these principles not just apply to you at work, but also that apply to you, as I mentioned before, at home. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to, or reintroduce you to, Dr. Dan Docherty. Dr. Dan, welcome to the Driving Change podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. Excited to be here.
So, it's been a year. 2024 has been an exciting year around the Braintrust family because we have certainly grown both in stature, but also in employees. And I think what I wanted to bring you on, I think the most to discuss was not just the principles behind NeuroCoaching, but really some of the actual results and some of the impact that it's having on our clients and not just their personal lives, but professional lives. But before we dive back into that, for those who maybe aren't familiar with you and your story, you don't get a pass like all the guests here. Give the audience a little bit of your backstory, your origin story. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, why you do what you do, and what led you to your passions here at Braintrust.
I will. I'll make it kind of quick. But so for me, growing up in Northern Ohio, I grew up a blue collar kid. My dad was a tool and die apprentice that worked his way through through his organization for 40 years, which doesn't happen as often today. All the way to the board seat, and then ultimately running and growing companies. And I remember kind of from that experience, all I ever knew, Jeff, was hard work growing up. I watched my dad every Saturday morning get up at 5:30, 6 in the morning, go to work. And so growing up kind of with that DNA. Cleveland was just this foundational thing for me with my mom and my dad, and growing up with my siblings in Northern Ohio. And, I always tell the story when we're out on the road together a lot about people that have impacted my journey through the years. You certainly are one of those in this season of my life, but in kind of going back and watching, from my high school music teacher to people that I've had in my career in coaching, to my dissertation chair, to just so many people around the journey, because you never get there on your own. And having an appreciation, even more so this year than any other year historically, about what's inside me from a DNA perspective to make impact for other people. And I've realized that the more I train and the more I teach this stuff, that without having a foundation of great core values and having a foundation of understanding who's impacted your journey and how that impacts you, who are we really at the core? So as I went through my career, I was very fortunate to get into the pharmaceutical industries, is where my love of neuroscience came from. So 25 years in pharma and kind of being in the epilepsy, ADHD, depression, Alzheimer's disease, I never really thought about the fact of how neuroscience and leadership would combine itself. But as you know, and you and I talk about this a lot, you go through the ups and the downs of not only life, but also of work. And it's that moment that I've described to you before, that it was at probably the lowest point of my leadership journey, coming out of pharmaceuticals, being in the pharmaceutical litigation space, that I wasn't leading that great. I wasn't coaching that great. My one-on-ones weren't that great, where, and you and I are both faith-based people. And that kind of journey led me to the opportunity to consider going back to school at an odd age to really dig into leader-follower relationships through kind of the power of neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and where I met an amazing mentor there and have been on that journey now. And that's right when you and I met. And so as I look along all of those kind of stopping points, and my amazing kids and my beautiful wife of 34 years now, and kind of going through that whole journey together, I just have so isolated to that. All that stuff has led to chasing impact on people. And I don't think that there's anything more important than we do in life, which is why I'm so passionate about kind of being in and around and leading our leadership practice. I don't think there's anything more powerful that we do than having conversations of impact, having impact on people, watching their journey go from a place where they never even could see themselves before, all the way to where they go. And I learned that through my parents, through my wife, through my father-in-law, through you, through great teachers in my journey. And it's just led to this amazing place that you and I happen to be in. So for me, the whole thing in summarizing that is, how can we have impact at the highest level? That's everything we strive for every day.
So what would you say, and I'm going to ask you to do this in a couple sentences just because it's fun and we make our clients do this sometimes. I mean, you lived a couple different lives, and now you're doing something you're really passionate about, and your energy is always high, it seems like. But at the end, what's your legacy going to be? Because you're in a position of thought leadership now, and people really look up to you from really around the globe as a thought leader in this space called coaching and leadership. What do you want your legacy to be?
It's simple, and we, as you know, we try to train people on their why and their story, because it matters. Everybody's unique story matters in their journey. And so my legacy is, if I can help others personally or professionally coach, not myself, but help them coach with purpose and impact, I fundamentally know that higher quality relationships are built. And when those relationships are built, productivity goes up, engagement level goes up, performance levels go up. And that doesn't matter whether we're personal or professional. So for me, that's the legacy. If someone were to walk away when it's all over for me and be like, wow, you know what? In that moment of time when I had that connection with Dan, or the people that Dan has trained, and they've made impact on others, that kind of ripple effect, game over. I'm happy, whether that's my children, whether that's you, whether it's our team members here at Braintrust, whether it's people that we serve and our clients. That's it. That's the end game for me. So
what do you think, as I get more, mature in my age, I'd like to say wise, but I think it's, I think it was John Maxwell said that, they say with wisdom comes age, but sometimes age comes alone. Like sometimes I feel like might be my case. But as I get older and become more self-reflective, and I'm recognizing how I respond in certain circumstances, and I see this a lot now in our clients that we coach, this kind of starts to go back into the emotional intelligence piece. But I want to jump off here. The idea that you use the term coaching, and coaching almost like leadership it's become cliched in a lot of worlds. What does coaching really mean? And I know you and I share a philosophy that it is an ongoing relational process, but where it tends to fall down the most is in the situational moments of impact, which is when a coach, could be a parent, could be a manager at work, they have to actually have a conversation. It could be a tough conversation, could be a great conversation. Where do those conversations tend to fall down, and why?
Well, we know, and there's a lot of research on this, but you and I see it every day. So I'm going to just kind of bring emotional intelligence for just a second into this whole conversation. So we know that emotions impact performance, and the heartbeat of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. So how aware are we going into those situations, and how can we, in a positive way, situationally program ourselves to manage those emotions? Whether I'm a great athlete going into the arena, to play any type of game or sport, the best athletes know how to focus, control their emotions, be present in the moment, deliver and do their job. If you're a great actor, it's the same thing. You so know what you're doing that you're not thinking. You go into a level of unconscious competence that you just do. It's all there, but you're not thinking, you're doing. I think the same thing with emotions. Like if I'm self-aware of what actually, and I know people don't like the word trigger, but like what triggers emotions for me or who triggers emotions for me, then the derailer for leadership is how I manage those before the impact on other people. So I think a lot of the stuff that we work with teams and leaders with, Jeff, is that whole self-awareness piece is first. Then I want you to think about the impact of that on other people. Because where it breaks down is I have found, and it's amazing to me, you and I launched NeuroCoaching this month about 3 years ago. And watching leaders go through this program with us is that I want them to look at themselves first. Really understand yourself first on their leader-wise stuff you talk to your guests about all the time. Understand you, your values, your story, how you create standards of excellence, how you emotionally control yourself. Don't let emotions derail your performance. Worry about you first. And then in the situation, every moment of impact generates from truth and trust. Every single one. If you don't have trust though, sometimes you're like, I don't know if I can give the truth. And then we don't get into conversations that can yield as much as we need to on the outside. So first, worry about you. Then when you go on then situationally, how does that impact all the conversations we have? Some of the most simple ones, all the way to the ones that are most difficult, and including, unfortunately, terminating or ending employment for team members. All that stuff is relevant. And I'll just say one more thing before you go on. You mentioned the definition of coaching. You and I aligned so tightly this year and in our book as well. This is a communication skill. It is a skill, and I kind of get a little bit more adamant now about if you're not putting in the practice and the repetition in order to be a great coach, to have great situational conversations, it's not good enough anymore. It's not good enough. Our people deserve more. And on the outside, so do our families, so do our colleagues, So hopefully I'm answering that, but it's a combination of self to others.
Yeah, and I mean, we built a communication company, right? And I think that the further I travel down this path, the more that I believe these words that are cliched and phrases like leadership and coaching and different sales enablement. There's a bunch of business terms that have almost become cliched. Ironically, one that hasn't is communication. It's so ignored and undervalued. It's almost like, of course, well, yeah, communications, you got to be good at communication. Yet it's the one area, to your point, that is the break point. It's the choke point. It's the bottleneck of skills that we see time and time again. It sinks teams, companies, families, communities, nations. Think about the impact that one word, communication, has in all aspects of what you just said as part of your legacy, is that creating relationship and high quality relationships. And we'll get into the framework in NeuroCoaching and how that helps you with situational communication as a coach.
Hey, Jeff, let me say this real quick, because you just hit on something that I think I don't know that we've actually really talked about before. When I went into my PhD program, it was actually titled Designing a Sustainable System. And I remember for literally a year and a half, I'm like, designing a sustainable system in social sciences, what is that? What does that even mean? And then as because you walked that journey with me.
Right.
I mean, you sat in the other room on the other side of our studio when I was defending my dissertation during COVID. But we went through that. It's like, I remember you and I having the conversation of, can we design a sustainable system for coaching that is going to drive sustained growth, not in the moment growth, but sustained growth and sustained performance. And you and I both know from 30 plus years of being in business that, quite honestly, you and I did not feel that we had an approach that could take us from the intuitive to the intentional that actually drove sustained growth and change, which is why we said, let's create one. There's a better way to do this through the foundations of neuroscience and behavioral psychology. All the stuff you created long before me with neuroselling, that we knew there was a better way. And so when you're hitting those different layers, it just reminded me back that it is a system. Every level of that matters.
Yeah.
And then communication goes all the way through every single one of those. Because if you recall, this year when we were training companies, we said, well, how pervasive of a problem is this? And you recall, our colleague of ours doing some research and found that study from Grammarly and the Harris poll. And they looked at 88% of leaders said they wish they had better tools to communicate. 88%. And over 70% of them said, we struggle with communication not just every year, but daily. And that's, worth, according to the research, like $1.2 trillion problem to solve.
Right.
Because you're not solving a problem. Why do you need a program? What's the real problem in communication, especially with AI and all this information that's flowing, Jeff? You and I both know the impact we have. You got to step back, look at what is communication really, and how does that impact your written communication, your oral communication, every situation that you have throughout hundreds of conversations every day.
Yeah, I say this quite often that dissemination of information does not equal communication, and I think sometimes we think it does. And anybody can disseminate information in a multitude of ways. It doesn't equal communication. In our world, communication, there's a shared understanding of an informational exchange that leads to some form of either an acknowledgement, an understanding, new information, or an action. And when you think about coaching, I think I always, even growing up in my corporate days, when I heard the word coaching conversation, in my mind immediately went to, hey, that one-on-one conversation I might have with an employee over coffee or even in my office once a month. That's coaching. When I mistakenly thought that was the only time that coaching was happening. Now, again, you might argue that other people out there listening go, well, you were an idiot. You were a horrible leader if you thought that. And what I really have appreciated about our work as we've done the research and built the programs to support it is every single day we're in the midst of communicating with somebody. And now, depending on your role, when I go home as a father, what environment am I creating in the climate in my house? And when I'm talking to my daughter, when she asks me her opinion on something, I'm coaching. When my wife engages me on a conversation about something she's thinking about doing, and I have an opinion that might be different or that I want to add to, I'm coaching. So if you think about coaching as the ability to help others self-discover something, that you're helping them travel down a path to get them further to where they're trying to go, wow, if you start to interpret coaching through that lens, number one, I still suck at it because I have about 1,000 opportunities a day to have those kind of conversations. And I have to be, to your point, so consciously aware that my unconscious doesn't always view them that way. But also in those moments, man, I get pretty reactive. And when you talked about emotional intelligence, and we'll get into some of the amplifiers that we talk about with the climates that we create, but I just like your thoughts around that reaction of, what is a coaching moment look like in our daily lives? Where does it take place? And what's the mindset you need to be better at it?
Yeah, there was one word, I don't know if you remember this, but when we first created the framework, the very first version, we actually had perspective in front of purpose. So what you and I refer to as kind of the 6 Ps of having a great situational conversation. And we had perspective in front of purpose. You remember we got a couple hundred coaching scenarios into it. We're like, wow, you know what? Purpose, not only like personal purpose, which bridges off a shared vision, like really that connecting foundational tissue to any relationship, which is non-negotiable, but then also the purpose of the conversation. The word this year in 2024 that's really popped more than anything to me, and I knew it, I've always known it intuitively, but is the word perspective. I'm just so convinced so many times, from having conversations with my wife to my kids to you and I having conversations. And you always tell me, like, always, kind of look through the lens of like best intent, which is really in some ways also leaning into, can I really understand your perspective on that? I'm convinced, Jeff, that if everyone that we talked about situational conversations with, if they really could look through the lens of someone else's perspective, it will not only downregulate emotion, but it'll help to have a richer self-discovery and code-generated type of conversation that's going to lead to better planning. And I think it also is like a huge pressure release valve off of leaders. Think, I got to know everything. I got to have all the right answers. I got to do all the right things. And it's like, no, that's garbage. That's not what great leaders do. Great leaders, like, I can see things through your perspective, which is why there's so much tension in our world, intergenerational tensions about any topic. This year we came through a huge political cycle, and all the tension that's naturally there. It's like, how many times do we not understand somebody else's perspective, or through the lens of curiosity, we don't honestly even care. We don't care. And that word, for some reason, to me, next to having a great plan, that's also really important. But that word to me on perspective has just been like kind of like the star word for me this year. We've now surpassed well over 3,000 plus coaching scenarios through our framework over the past 3 years. And watching all those come through, I just see the light bulb go off when somebody says, ooh, do I really understand that from somebody else's perspective? Or I'm going in charging like a bull from my perspective and not really open to thinking about yours. The world would be a better place, Jeff, in situational conversations if we could lean into that word.
So I'll tease the audience to keep listening because we're going to roll out the entire framework in a few minutes. But I do want to click into this one a little bit because I agree. I think it's probably, when you look at all the other leadership development tools that are out there, from strengths to emotional intelligence to psychological safety to fill in the blank, and we use the word, the big buzzword of the last few years has been empathy and vulnerability, right? And if you think about empathy versus sympathy, we can get into that if you want, but the idea of empathy is, by its very nature, I have to think of your perspective. I have to put myself in your shoes and try to see if I can believe I can feel what you feel, to see what you see. And man, it is probably one of the hardest human attributes or skills, however you want to look at it. And now maybe for knuckleheads like me, it's harder than for those of you wired like you who are much better at empathy. But this idea of others' perspective, if you're listening, I want you to pause for just a second and think about now every single interaction you have with another human being at any given point in a day. How many times before you open your mouth has your brain paused and went, I wonder what they're feeling? Or I wonder what their point of view is. I wonder why they're asking me this. I wonder why this is taking place from their perspective before you even opened your mouth. By the way, I am this is the master cobbler whose kids have no shoes because I'm not great at this. But when I am, it absolutely changes the conversation. And I know we're going to get into this more with how to do this as a coach better, but it's that emotional control piece that I have a tough time with from emotional intelligence, right? Is not reacting. Because I'm a redliner, right? I'm on go. I'm RPMs are pegged all the time and I'm a driver and I'm go, 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 go. So when I don't think about your perspective, or worse yet, I make assumptions that I actually know your perspective and then either don't care, which is wrong, or I assume I know your perspective and I just run right over top of it with my agenda. And so when you think about how important this perspective is, what have you found in all these coaching scenarios as a key that helps these coaches, managers, husbands, wives, doesn't matter, fathers, mothers, get better at going from intuitively capable of thinking of another's perspective to intentionally practical of doing it more frequently?
Yeah, so two aspects to this. One thing you hit on earlier when you were talking about the different levels and layers, inside social awareness, which is actually where empathy sits in the emotional intelligence world, that is a core competency. Inside social awareness, the impact on others. There's another layer to that most people forget, and it's organizational effectiveness. Because as leaders, we see the currents and the trends inside the organization, our ability to communicate that. That's actually at multiple levels. And those are the two that actually sit inside social awareness. So how do we help people be more intentional about it? I know this is going to sound overly simple. First of all, you got to increase the awareness that it's important. Number two, it's just a better way to build relationships. But the way that they do it, when we real play, because we do real coaching scenarios with people, like bring a real scenario to the table that happens any day. I don't really care what the scenario is. Let's bring it. Let's test the framework. The questions that we ask them are driven from the other person's perspective by design. So the way they intentionally get to do that is I don't have them think about it from their perspective. They should already know it. But I have them through repetition, and the great athletes in the world, from great coaches to great athletes to great performers, they know, great business people, they know that repetition is the key. And you and I train this all the time. It is through repetition. And as you often say, the intensity of what we believe will drive the consistency of our behaviors. That repetition is going to drive a lot of that. So I don't let them come in with just one scenario. I want you to do multiple scenarios. You've got to get that repetition of thinking from somebody else's perspective, not as a secondary way of looking at conversations, but a primary. And here's the thing I also tell them, Jeff, it only takes a beat. Because they're like, oh, that's really hard. No, it's not. Just try to do it first. The best doctors, the best counselors, they can put themselves into somebody else's shoes, and they do that intentionally. So just ask yourself the question, am I going into the conversation from my perspective or somebody else's? And then lastly, the other way to make it intentional is ask a great question. If you don't know what their perspective is, ask them. It will naturally drive empathy and even compassion. Just ask them, say, I want to understand what your perspective is on this because I have mine. I want to make sure I understand yours. And you'll see your whole tone come down in the way you handle the conversation.
So from a neuroscience standpoint, tell the audience a little bit about how, we make this sound like, oh yeah, just do that. But how you're literally fighting your own human biology because of self-preservation. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we wake up we're human beings. We wake up concerned about ourselves, which is fine, but you have to train yourself now to really put yourself in the shoes of others. And when you do that, and more as you and I, as we teach this, more modern neuroscience is talking about the power of networks in the brain. There's all kinds of different components in this 3 to 4 pound machine we have between our ears. But behaviorally, the way that we show empathy, which is often called the empathic network, is to show that we actually care about somebody else. If they can't internally visualize that you, Jeff, as my coach, as my friend, as my parent, are going to help me go from where I am to where I want to go. If they can't internally visualize that, and they don't believe that you care about what they care about, the reality is as you know, when we teach, they're just not open to new ideas.
Yeah.
And you're dead in the water from the beginning. So, and this is where I kind of get up on my ante about this a little bit. If you choose to do the other way, it's just not very efficient for how we as human beings process information when we're fighting self-preservation by definition. That's what because it's who we are. It goes all the way, what you write in your first book, it's all the way back to the caveman days.
Yeah.
It goes all the way back to survival. And now survival in 2024, 2025 looks a little bit different, at least in Western culture. But we're still fighting that every single day, every single moment when we wake up. And if you don't train it, oftentimes you'll fall back into the trap. And I'll just say this in closing here. Some people are intuitively very, very good at it. They're just very good at it. And so somebody out there might be listening and go, I'm world class at that. I naturally think of other people. Of course I want to serve others. Well, that's a superpower. That's a strength. That's a talent invested in became a strength. Keep going with it. Others of us, I think we have to, when you don't have self-awareness or you don't have somebody like you're a great accountability partner to me and hopefully I am to you. If you don't have anybody that you trust enough to call you on when you see those things, then you might want to consider changing the people around you, because that's what great leaders do. And
I think that's such a good point. And it's funny too, because, we launched this company with the customer conversation with neuroselling. And the idea that most of our clients still think that they understand their customers, but they don't. And when you watch them communicate with their customers and prospects, they clearly are self-serving, right? They're talking about we call watches. We make a lot of jokes about that. And when you ask them to give the customer's point of view, they have a difficult time doing it. So what do we tell them? I say, under pressure, you will communicate from your highest level of training, knowledge, and experience and from self-preservation. Well, as coaches, we're the same thing. The difference here is it's the coachee that's the quote unquote prospect. And we have an agenda, and we'll take this really practical because I want you to share the framework in a second. We have an agenda as a manager, typically day to day, because I'm getting heat from above me. And maybe so many climates are created in today's business world where if the number's not there, then what rolls downhill. Well, it's not the stinky stuff. It's actually cortisol. It's stress comes rolling downhill. And then as a manager, every time I meet with you, my agenda is why aren't you filling in the blank? Why aren't you performing at this level? Why aren't you? So then the pressure then creates this entire compliance stress cycle, which we can get into a little bit too. And so one of the things that this idea of pausing enough to have enough emotional control to go, okay, the pressure's real from on high, right? I'm feeling it from my boss and he's feeling or she's feeling it from their boss. I have a choice to make in that moment. I can turn around and diffuse that pressure all over my team, or I can diffuse it on my own through some self-reflective exercises so that when I go to coach my team, I'm in a much different place, even in spite of the pressure. And again, master cobbler here. Kids have no shoes. This is so hard for people who are drivers, for people who don't know how to process stress and recognize how to diffuse it. So before we get into the framework, I don't want to shortchange this, because if we can make one difference to one person today listening to this episode on how to diffuse stress, put it in the right bucket with the right perspective before they turn and have those conversations, what advice would you give?
Yeah, well, I'll say this first and foremost, and I so fundamentally believe this at the core of my being because it was happening to me. And I want everybody listening to us to hear us. Stress will kill you. And it will kill others. Maybe not metaphorically kill them, but they'll leave you in companies and organizations, in families. You know, they'll make a decision to do something different. And that kind of cascade, you threw out a word, you said the compliance, kind of the compliance stress cycle or the compliance cycle. You know, you go to the National Institute of Health, you can go look it up if you want to. But when you walk into a situation that triggers stress, people have to know it triggers your sympathetic nervous system. So something is happening throughout your whole, back to the system, your whole system. And when that happens and cortisol levels go up and adrenaline levels go up, and all of a sudden your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, all these things, your respiratory system is out of control, you're not sleeping well. Here's what's happening on the impact. The impact is you're not as open, you're not as flexible, you're not as creative, you're not as great of a problem solver, you're not as open to new ideas. You don't feel safe. That stress goes into this cycle and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. As we sit here in December, you know, really at the end of the year, knowing that's why when we step back off that cycle for a little bit and our immune system isn't that healthy either. What happens when people come off the cycle? They get sick. Their system shuts down. Ooh, what's happening here? You know, so I think you're exactly right. When the reason the framework is designed the way it sits is not that compliance is bad. And you and I don't talk about regulatory compliance. We're talking about compliance to standards of excellence that ultimately drive performance. Compliance is fine. And so is compassion, and so is empathy. That's a whole different cycle. But the best leaders and the best coaches know how to balance the two because they're aware. Now, if you're listening to this, you're like, okay, when you walk into a situation, are you more apt to trigger hope and care and well-being, or are you more apt to trigger stress? Just naturally on how you enter environments, you know? And the thing is not that there's a right or wrong answer, but it's that you're doing those things intentionally. Right? So when you don't take the beat, when you don't take the pause, when you don't think of someone else's perspective, you're driving more stress. And you taught me this from the moment I got here. That stuff that we put in the backpack, it goes home, it comes back. It goes home, it comes back. And it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier, which is why, you know, we're so adamant about you and I taking our business and saying, we really want to help organizations in the practice of leadership development do that world class. And we want to help those that are having external conversations in sales performance do that at a level that is just better than anybody else in the world, you know, because the impact is so real. On all kinds of, however you define performance.
So this is a perfect segue then, because we talk a lot about emotional contagion. It's a real thing. It's not some idea. It's measurable, and that your emotions literally are literally, in this case, like you transfer those emotions to others and they catch it. That's why it's contagious. Positively, negatively, it doesn't matter. And when we talked earlier about as a leader, as a manager, as a parent, you create an environment. That environment is, as the leader, is a reflection most times of how you show up every day. And we call that the climate, right? That's, in this case, the coaching climate. And when you interact and you have good self-control and you manage your emotions and stress, you learn how to think about other people's perspective, and you're able to have those hope-filled conversations that still have accountability with standards, and you get people to see how they can self-select to co-create what they need to do next to perform. It's proven time and time again, higher performance in every organization, right? We know that. So we take the coaching climate. We'll talk a little bit more about, because we built a proprietary assessment around helping organizations measure not just, is this person a good, like, instant coach in a moment? Have they created an ongoing climate where their team believes that consistently they demonstrate the behaviors required to build trust, connection with accountability that drives high performance? Then measure that climate over time. And that's a really powerful way to do it. So then we took the climate, and now I want you to introduce the situational conversation framework. Because one of the things that we recognized was there's two basic conversations that happen on a regular basis. And they're usually rear view mirror conversations where we're, as a coach, talking about what happened, or they're windshield conversations where we're talking about what we need to see happen. And then we need to have a framework around how to get unconsciously following almost a prescriptive, if you will, conversation roadmap that we can commit to memory so we stay on track with what we know works in the brain with any leader-follower relationship. So why don't you introduce, first of all, you can comment on anything you want I just said, but then why don't you introduce the 6 stages to neurocoaching or steps to the neurocoaching framework. Don't go too deep in each one of them because I will come back and ask you questions about each.
So let me say this first. So when we train this, we train it in 3s. The brain learns well in 3s. And so when we start, let's just say we're walking into a conversation and I'm walking in and you're my CEO. The thing I'm filtering for the first set of 3s is I want to make sure we're very clear on the purpose of the conversation, because the most precious commodity you have is time. And I want to make sure how many times have we just had run-on conversations, and also we pick up this topic, and like, well, we never really got to what we wanted to get to. Clear purpose, stated purpose, line to personal purpose. Like that's step 1. Step 2 then is what you and I just spent a number of minutes talking about, which is perspective. If I have a clear purpose and I think about it from your perspective, guess what it opens up? And this step 3, and then I'll do 3, let you ask me a follow-up question if you have one, then I'll do the other 3, is plan and path. And the reason plan and path are together, and this is the biggest gap in thousands of coaching scenarios now that not just me, but our coaching staff has seen, is that I'll say to someone, hey, what's the plan for that? Like, oh, I got it. No, I want to see it. Like, oh no, trust me, I got it. I'm like, no, I want to see it. And they're like, well, we've talked about it, but I don't really have it. And you and I both know we had one of our clients this year that literally was like, wow, we not only have we set the clearest set of standards, but we also don't really have a plan. I want everybody to be accountable to a plan that they own, that they felt they had buy-in in, and I've just seen that as such a gap. How in the world can you measure whether you're on or off the path if you have no plan? And what I want to tell people really clearly on these first 3 steps, when you do that, performance sits on the outside, followed by us accomplishing goals. Coach the plan.
Okay. So the first 3 steps in this 6-step conversational framework is, first step, purpose. And I see this miss a lot because there isn't a stated purpose of the conversation. And many times then defining that purpose as, hey, we're going to review something in the rearview mirror and we're going to have a discussion about it. Versus, hey, this is a planning forward conversation. The purpose of this conversation is we're going to build a plan. So I think that's key, is the rearview mirror is we're going to review the plan and to talk about why you might be off the path. Whereas a windshield conversation is we're going to talk about creating a plan and talk about what being on the path looks like. Then that second step then is okay, here's the purpose. I try to do my best to think about your perspective and what it means to you to either help us create this plan or why we might not be executing on the plan. And here's how I believe you might be feeling. And then you let them express whether you got that right or wrong. So you're aligned on they at least believe you care about them enough to recognize you thought about their perspective. And then to your point, the plan and the path, this client that you were mentioning before, not the first, by the way, is a Fortune 100 large global organization that the senior leader kept finding that he knew they were off the path. He just didn't know what the plan was because nobody seemed to have a plan. And this really helps align that. Okay, so purpose, perspective, plan or path. Now, what are the next 3?
Yeah, so the next 3 unlock, I think, even easier. Because if you have a great plan, what would you think would be naturally next?
Pizza?
Yeah,
no.
Well, for us maybe.
Oh.
Is progress. Measure the progress.
Okay.
And hold people, they want accountability. Hold them accountable to progress. And I want to say this too. The 6 Ps weren't designed to be complicated. They were designed to help people intentionally coach in a way that they could do with repetition. So they're not designed to be complicated. But if you measure the progress, then guess what? Our job relative to the 5th P is problems. Now, somebody out there will go, oh, a problem shows up first. Maybe. But if I can go back and say, okay, purpose, perspective, plan, path, what have we measured? Then I can get to the root of what the problem is. So in the fifth step is we should be in the job of removing problems as we coach. And then lastly, the sixth one is what does success look like? It's performance. It's performance. So I want people to think of progress, measure it, hold people accountable, especially if they've had input into the plan. They want you to ask them how it goes. And if they won't, a different type of corrective conversation, because I would challenge how much will do they actually have if they don't really want it to be measured. Great performers want it to be measured. Knock down the problems, measure the performance, and measure it consistently, and let that flow happen.
So I think why this has worked so well for so many of our clients, especially in the business world, is there's a million different coaching philosophies out there, and grow and Togaro and all these different, lead and all these acronyms. But number one, they weren't ever rooted in neuroscience. So they were open to interpretation as to how they were executed against. And number two, they weren't adhered to on a regular basis. So with these 6 steps, I want to give some practical examples of this, because once you've laid down the framework well with someone, you still, okay, so let's say we're having a conversation. I said, Dan, we need to build a strategic plan. We're right in the middle of this, by the way, for ours. Hey, we need a strategic plan for the leadership practice at Braintrust. So let's have a meeting. The purpose of this meeting is for you and I to sit down and talk about what's a great strategic plan look like for 2025 and beyond. I thought about your perspective. And as the chief coaching officer around here, I know X, Y, and Z, and I kind of, how much am I missing? And you're going to nod along, go, well, yeah, you got that right, but don't forget these 2 things are really important. Oh, didn't think about that. Perfect. Now we're going to sit down in a windshield, and we're going to, what's the plan look like? We're going to co-create a plan with you being in charge of it, and me asking you questions, kind of helping you think critically about it, and then defining, well, what does the path look like for us to execute it? And then how will we measure, we're planning, so how will we measure progress along the way? Weekly, monthly, quarterly, how do you want to do it? And then you're going to give me that and say, okay, well, based on that, it looks really solid. What do you think might get in the way? Like, where are the barriers? Where are the problems? Where are the landmines that we're not anticipating? Let's try to plan for them. Okay, then we have a good discussion about what we might not be anticipating. Maybe we bring in some other people to add their perspective to the problems and go back and tweak the plan. And then at the end, how are we going to ultimately know that we performed? And how are we going to celebrate that performance? So that's a windshield version of the 6 Ps. Now, let's say we had that conversation. And then a month from now, we're going to have a rear view of the same conversation. Would you recommend that we enter it at the progress stage, or would you recommend that I start back at 1 again?
I would recommend first, any process, if you don't have repetition, you're not going to know it that well, and you might only jump to 1 step. So I would encourage you to go back to step 1 and at least run the filters.
Yep. Perfect.
Does it mean you have to communicate that every time? No, but in your mind, you're like, okay, I want to make sure, because our purpose is shifted, because it might be that we're measuring it. So the purpose of the meeting is shifted. Their perspective may have completely shifted now that we're at a different stage of that process. So is the plan still as relevant or not relevant? And you want to know what the most refreshing part is? If you coach this with enough repetition and you actually use the words, and one of our clients said to us, hey, there's no secrets in this. Like, how refreshing would it be when somebody walks into your office and says, hey, you know what? I know you're going to ask me about my perspective on this. So here's the clear purpose and here's the perspective. Now I've evaluated this plan, and they're taking it back to you proactively. And when they start doing that, that's when you got it, right? And I'm going to tell you, including myself for 30 years, I never did that.
Right.
I jumped all over the place.
Yep.
And I would hope, and it's not a strategy. I would hope I'd get to the end point. And one other thing that, and you're a wizard on the creativity side. So, one of the things I think that we brought to this program this year is, first of all, information, to your point earlier, is fine. Everything we train now has a step of application. If it doesn't have application, I'm not interested in just the information. Go read a book, quite honestly.
Right.
So like when you this year said, hey, each one of these steps, think of it through the lens of a stoplight. How many times are we blowing through that stoplight? That was a game changer for our clients because they can see the stoplight. You can't get away forever with red lights. And then when we talked to you and I about rear view and windshield, which you've brought up twice, it's like, you have two of those for a reason. Every automobile in the world, even the autonomous Teslas, still have a rear view mirror and a windshield. You need them both, but they're different shapes, they're different sizes, and they're used for different utility and purpose. If someone listening to this says, I need both mirrors, but I got to really concentrate on how much time am I spending in the rear view versus the windshield, that's a higher level of skill. with intentionality. Like those two visuals that you helped us create, I think has helped take the program to another level, because I want people to visually see, don't blow through the stoplights, and if you do blow through the stoplights and you do it intentionally, well, maybe it's an emergency. Right. If you think of an ambulance going down the street, they're going to blow through stoplights.
Yes.
Because they know somebody's going to die at the end of the thing. So if you choose that for a reason, well, then you know what? Evaluate later whether it worked or it didn't work. At least you made a choice.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And how many of you that are listening are leaders or managers, and you get your day hijacked 3 times a day because somebody's hair's on fire, and they want to come and immediately jump to step 5, which is problems. They don't come in and go, hey, the purpose of this conversation is I've got problems, but I thought about your perspective as teaching them to work backwards and go, hey, Dan, you have a minute? Because the purpose I need to talk to you about is XYZ project. There's a couple things going off the rails and I want to talk to you about it. You're like, sure. So I thought about your perspective on this. You're probably worried about X. However, when we designed the plan, and we talked about what the path looked like and how we'd measure progress, we didn't anticipate this problem. And then boom, now I'm connecting the problem back to the progress that's not being made,
right,
back to the plan that I committed to, and explaining why we're off the path.
And you want to know why, if you don't do that intentionally, and you and I know this on the science, is that problems not only evoke emotions, but they invoke all that kind of neurochemistry and that cocktail in our brain. So cortisol levels are really high. If you're not the firefighter that diffuses that a little bit, you're only going to add more fuel to the fire.
Right.
So as a coach, you have to be able to, and you and I both train this, and I've been honored to be the head coach kind of here for 6.5 years, is even in neuroselling and neurocoaching, you've got to be able to work forward. You've got to be able to work it backwards,
right,
but that only comes through repetition. And as we often tell people, if you've got a framework that really works for you and you do it intentionally and your engagement levels are high and your productivity is high and your performance is high, well, then by all means use it,
right,
and see how this can add some fuel to it. But if you don't, be mindful of that too. Maybe, just maybe, this will help.
So this framework, and for those who are listening, it is the book NeuroCoaching is going to be out. It might even already be out soon, soon after this, but certainly within the next few months. The science that backs this up is so clear. Now, you and I are nerds on this. We love the science. So, others listening may not be as excited about the science as we are. But I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this, Dan and I both of us spent our corporate careers in biotech and pharmaceuticals, and we recognize how important empirical evidence is, not just to bringing new drugs to market, but for people to have a willingness to change. And I think the myth I bought as a first-time manager, actually as a third-time manager in my corporate career, was, well, I have my own style and approach. So, don't force me into some kind of a box when I'm over here and I'm a uniquely gifted leader this way. And though there's some truth to my uniqueness and your uniqueness and anyone is listening uniqueness, I think the myth that I bought in was I didn't need the structure. I didn't need the framework, if you will. I didn't need it because I didn't understand the science. I didn't understand that my unconscious repetition was always going to be like a box of bottle rockets. It was going to go off different directions at different times with different people, and I was going to get all kinds of inconsistencies in my ability to help drive performance as a leader and a coach. So I just kind of want to dispel that myth for anyone who's listening out there to think, well, here's another framework going to put me in a box and not let me be who I am. That's one big myth, right?
Well, I know you're right on this. I know we're going to be coming up on time too. So I want to say this, because there's certain things I call BS on now.
Yeah.
Because they are. And I don't know if it's because I'm getting old or what it is, but when people say, I don't need a system, they're wrong. Every great coach in the world has a system. But once they have a system, the ones, and you said the word earlier, the ones that are situationally fluent based on the situational context know how to adapt. Right. And adaptability is an emotional competency that makes the best coaches, but doesn't mean they don't have a system.
Right.
So I don't believe the garbage for 1 second in the 2 things that we do for a living on sales performance and leadership development, that people don't need a system. I just don't buy it. My whole program, Jeff, I spent a lot of money for 5 years on designing a sustainable system.
Yeah.
The world is based on our whole infrastructure, our economy, everything's built on a system, right? But have the fluidity in the system that comes through repetition and, quite honestly, practice.
And we'll get that's important too. Man, that's what we could do a whole episode on practice and the lack thereof. if you think about as a listener, you're listening right now, if you think about in your life, all the different areas of your life where you have got to be successful in, whatever that area is, you probably have a predictable process that you follow, a system of some sort, from paying bills to fill in the blank, right? You have some mechanism of doing something similar each time you do it, so you can do what? Predict the outcome. That's how our brains are built. Our brains are built for risk mitigation and prediction. And if we can reduce the risk or perceived risk of any given outcome of any given situation, it allows us to predict what we can expect an outcome to be in any given situation. Well, no one listening, I think, would dispute that. Okay, well, what's your system for communication? What's your sustainable system for communication? Oh, well, don't tread on me. You can't box. Don't fence me in, man. I'm a free bird. I just do my thing. I mean, this is how I'm wired. I mean, God gave me creativity. This is where I call BS. Because ain't nobody more creative and carefree than me in many ways. But more I've learned over the years is communication with humans, human-to-human communication with organs inside the 8-pound head, the 3-pound gray matter. It needs the predictability. You're doing it anyway. Look, I'm predicting what I think you're thinking while you're saying something right now on this podcast, which is telling me where I should go next. You're doing the same thing. If you're listening, your brains are doing the same thing. When you watch a movie, what are you doing? Your brain's predicting. What do you think is going to happen in the next scene? We're constantly trying to predict an outcome. Well, if you want to have better accuracy with outcomes in the conversations you're having in your personal and professional lives, you might want to think about some type of a communication system. As confining as that might sound, it's actually very freeing.
It is very freeing.
Right?
That's a great comment. And not only that, it allows you to be more fully present. If I've learned anything in life, and this is something that I work on every day because I'm not that great at it, it's like, can I be fully present in the moment? And when I know something so well and I'm not actually thinking about that thing and I'm thinking about being present in the moment, I'm going to be a better connector to people, and we're going to get further faster. But when you don't have a system that you've actually have ingrained in a way that allows you to move more freely, then what happens is then you're thinking so much about what's coming next because of that prediction thing you were talking about. Then all of a sudden I'm not fully present. And when I'm not fully present, I'm not actively listening. I'm not fully there. I'm back to self-preservation on my own agenda. And it's a cascade, man. It's a cascade.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
See, cute, very cute.
So that's our Navy SEAL friends, Commander McGinnis and others, they have the Navy SEAL expression, slow is smooth is fast. And I think when it comes to communication, you can train your brain to go slow, become unconsciously competent at being really good at coaching, at being really good at communicating more effectively with your spouse, at being really good at communicating more effectively with your customers, with your kids. But it takes work. It takes a little bit of effort. And part of it is self-discovering what is the science behind great communication. And that's what I love about what we've been able to do together.
And you said this, and this will be in the book, is that the inside out, and we train, ever since the day one when I got here, I never heard the terms inside out before communication. When you have a shared vision, really a shared vision through the power of stories and values and standards that align to great strategy, when you really have that, at multiple levels, it sets up the situational conversations. And then you said a couple times about the coaching climate, and we're fortunate enough to kind of own that terminology. But man, we do create climates every day. We feel it when it's stormy. That's another picture you created for us, right? We know it when it's sunny, and and how we navigate through that, you can measure it. And one of the things I'm most proud of on this year, it's not going to be the book. And it goes back to legacy. It's the impact that I see when leaders are like, I never thought of it this way. And these are world-class leaders, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's like, I never thought of it that way. And then they're like, wow, I'm more mindful of the climate that I create every day in order for the sustainability of my company and my people to thrive and flourish. To me, if we make that impact every year, amazing things happen. Amazing things happen. And it's just, it's the work is worth it.
Yeah, I think that one of my silly dreams here is when we think about our testimonials we get back is when you have a manager, whether they're a first-time manager or been a manager for 30 years, and they get a 5 out of 10 on a coaching climate score, and over the course of 6 months of our coaching and training, it goes to an 8 or 9, that means the people that person is responsible for are going home better, healthier, like more productive, and they're not taking the junk in the brain trunk or the backpack, the crap in the backpack, right, home with them, which means we're actually impacting families. We're impacting teams, which are impacting organizations, which are going home and impacting families, which is impacting communities, all by teaching this stuff. Now, we didn't even get into neuro questioning and how to activate better questions as a coach. That's going to be in the book. We didn't get into all the amplifiers around how do you then amplify these principles in a coaching climate. We'll probably come back in the new year and maybe go a little deeper into some of those as we roll out. We've been teaching the NeuroCoaching program, the training and coaching program, to companies for a couple of years now. But now with the book coming out, and it's catching fire. Let's be real. I mean, this has been insane this year, the reception that we've gotten over this program.
I love it. I mean, let's do another episode on the coaching climate. Let's just really dig into that topic, because I think I know through research and practice that's a really important topic.
Let's do that. I think that's going to be important because we're both passionate about this. And I think as we continue to go and grow, and I've learned a ton from you in this journey, and I learned a ton from our coaches because they're all better coaches than I am. So if you're listening out there today and you think you want to hire me as a coach, no, you want to hire these guys as a coach.
No, you're pretty good.
So thank you for jumping on and sharing your thoughts and your why and your perspective and all of your expertise in this field. We're going to come back in the new year, I think, and go a little deeper into the coaching climate and the activators, see if we can continue to help even folks who maybe haven't gone through the program learn some of these tips and techniques. So until then, Dr. Dan, thank you.
Thanks for all you do too. Appreciate it.
So you've just been listening to Dr. Dan Docherty on the Driving Change podcast talk about all of the incredible results that the NeuroCoaching program is driving here at Braintrust. And again, remember, it's not about NeuroCoaching. It's about creating a system of coaching communication that allows you to really live out your own purpose better, both at work and at home, making a bigger impact on the people that you've been tasked with leading, whether they be your spouse and kids and community, or whether they be your employees, your peers, or even your boss, because you can have that same kind of influence with them as well. So until next time, I'm Jeff Bloomfield. We'll see you then.